Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today, we're talking fishing line. From the beginner basics of what different lines are for, to more advanced techniques and specific lines that will change your fishing. I'm excited to dive into this topic with you guys. Fishing line is critically important to your success on the water. Understanding the differences between them and how to use them to your advantage is everything. So today we'll be discussing the differences between monofilament, fluorocarbon, braided line, copolymer, and then going much more advanced after that into specifics about each category. But before we do any of that, let me just take a second to make a quick announcement. Our most requested series of the year is the Holiday Buyer's Guide series, and I am pumped to announce that that series begins tomorrow morning. Yes, tomorrow, because as many of you know, when the Holiday Buyer's Guides begin, we switch to a 7-day-a-week schedule, a brand new video every single day. And really that starts with today, because after today, it's a new one every single day. All of that also coincides with Tackle Warehouse's holiday Black Friday sales. They've got a series of sales. We line that up as much as possible intentionally to help you guys save money along the way. And that is exactly why we're talking line today. The buyer's guides have not begun yet, but the sales have begun, and line is on sale at Tackle Warehouse right now. So if you're watching this right when it comes out, the things we're talking about, you can save a lot of money on those right now. So we wanted to get you as much information as possible at a time when you could save as much money as possible. And with that, I am really excited to dive into this. Let's start with some generalizations about fishing line. Okay, for the beginner, we'll just take a couple of minutes here. For the beginner who doesn't even understand basic differences, let's get those covered and out of the way. And then we can dive into each category and get very specific about ways that you can advance your fishing. Now, again, these are going to be generalizations. There are exceptions to every rule. It's incredible how advanced line has become. But in general, let's kick this off with monofilament. Monofilament is going to be a more value-packed line. So you can save a lot of money fishing with mono. Typically, the line is going to float. So there are some advantages there. It's also going to have quite a bit of stretch to it. Okay, it's a line with a lot of give. Now, obviously, there are times when a floating, stretchy line is a negative. That's why you have other options. But there are times where that's a major advantage too. Typically, treble hook situations, crankbaits, topwater. There are a lot of people that throw a topwater on a straight monofilament because there's shock absorption in that stretch, so they don't bend out their little treble hooks. And of course, that floating line makes it much easier to walk a topwater. So a mono will typically save you a bunch of money, and it has some definite advantages. Now, stepping up in technology a little bit from there, we get into your copolymers, and copolymers are definitely the most underserved line category. And the reason why is that most people make a jump to a fluorocarbon, but a copolymer is essentially a fluorocarbon coated monofilament. So they layer a fluorocarbon over the top of it. And what that will typically do is make that line harder and more durable. So you still have a lot of those advantages that you've come to know with monofilament, but now you've got it in a harder line, meaning you can beat it up on rocks, you can beat it up on wood, you can fish it around docks, and it just takes more of a beating before it gets cut. That's really the advantage to copolymer. Also a little bit lower stretch than traditional monos for the most part. Now, fluorocarbon line, this is by far our largest category in bass fishing. It's what most people use as their main line. Fluorocarbon You've got budget options, you've got high-end options, and everything in between. But typically you spend more for fluorocarbon, but you have some real gains there. The majority of fluorocarbon is a sinking line. What else do you need to know about it? It's very clear. So in a clear water situation, finesse situation, really clear water, it tends to be harder to see, more invisible, if you will, in the water than other lines. So if you have line shy fish that you want to catch, fluorocarbon is definitely the way to go. It tends to be much lower stretch than an equivalent monofilament. Meaning, what does that mean to you as the angler? It means that a fluorocarbon line, as a rule, will be more sensitive and easier to set the hook on than a monofilament, okay? Again, generalizations. Line has become so advanced that they can take any one of these lines and get it to behave all sorts of different ways. But these are generally how these categories work. And then last is braid. Braided line tends to be extremely low stretch, okay? So that means unbelievable sensitivity, great durability in most situations. It's a phenomenal line. If you want to hit them hard, you want a positive hook set, nothing hits harder than braid. Because again, very low stretch, so when you set, there's very little shock absorption before that hook hammers home. Of course, the downside of braided line is that it is quite literally a tiny rope. So it is actual fiber strands braided together, thus the braided name. So you end up with a solid line that stands out in the water, i.e. the fish can see it. So there are only a handful of techniques where you would use braided line without the addition of a leader material on the end of it. Braid plus a leader is the main way that I personally fish. And again, we're going to dive into all of these categories today. But there are advantages and disadvantages to each one. Now, that's sort of the quick dive into it for a beginner, if you will. Now we're going to jump into these by category. And in each category, I tried to grab some really budget-friendly lines, then those core lines, because there are hundreds of options in each category. It's incredible how much fishing line is on the market. So I grabbed you our key confidence lines. So budget-friendly lines, then those like main core lines that you're going to use day in and day out. And then if there are niche lines, which in my case have become some of my most common lines, and I'll explain why as we go for each one of these. And we'll do that for each category. Okay, let's begin with fluorocarbon, because again, that is the biggest category by far. It's the category that most people are interested in. Right out the gate, the number one disadvantage of fluorocarbon is cost. Okay, if you are just a weekend warrior, you fish when you can, you work your 9 to 5, sometimes you get to go on the weekend, you don't want to spend a fortune on fishing line. I get it. That's why so many people use mono. But in recent years, we now have these great budget fluorocarbon options. And in particular, there are two, okay? From Sunline, we have Model FC. From Seagar, we have the Seagar Basics. These are both excellent choices. Huge cost savings compared to traditional fluorocarbon lines. Huge cost savings. So if you are curious about fluorocarbon, you want to give it a try, either one of these is an excellent choice. And of course, like every video that we talk about, in the video description below the video, if you're watching this on YouTube, just scroll down. If you're on Facebook, you might need to click more, open the description. You might need to click the link to get to the rest of the links. If you're on TacticalBassin.com, you just scroll. The entire thing's right there, okay? But below the video, no matter where you're watching right now, there's a description, and we will link every single thing that we talk about in the exact order that we talked about it, with links straight to Tackle Warehouse. So you don't have to take notes. You don't have to try to remember what things are. With that, these beginner lines, if you will, these budget lines, let me pick those back up. The one thing I want to say is there are huge differences between a budget fluorocarbon and a high-end fluorocarbon. So understand that you will get to dabble with fluoro, you'll get to experience that better clarity in the water, more invisible, lower stretch, all of those things. But these lines will still, they're not going to hold up the same that a true high-end fluorocarbon will, right? That sort of goes without saying, but it's going to allow you to experience it without spending a fortune to see if this is something you really want to do. One step up from there, you spend a little bit more, there is a line that really stands out from the rest, and that is the Seaguar Red Label. On a budget, Seaguar Red Label is where you make that crossover. I feel like you make that crossover into a true, I mean, it's good fluorocarbon. You're not giving up much of anything, and you're doing it at a great, great price. That's a really good choice. Now from there, we're jumping into the core of fluorocarbon. And all of a sudden, the wind is starting to blow quite a bit. Hopefully, it's not too much for you guys. I'm just going to keep on rolling here, okay? 3 of those core lines. So I'm talking fluorocarbon where you're going to spool your entire spool with that one line. And this is a line you can use for almost everything, right? These lines do sink, so you don't want to use it for top water. But other than that, you can do everything from throw a worm to a jig to a crankbait to a spinnerbait, you name it. You can go out and shake a jig and minnow if you want to. You can do it all on fluorocarbon. Now, that's not necessarily what I personally do, and I'll explain as we go, but these are those main lines that you can spool up completely and use it for nearly everything. Again, sort of moving up in the price points, okay? Right here, Seaguar again, this is in VizX. For the guy that, I mean, you've decided fluorocarbon is the way for you. You've fished cheaper fluorocarbons. You've experienced the difference. Now you want fluorocarbon that lasts longer. The biggest thing I see with fluorocarbon is cheaper fluorocarbons will tend to get hazy sooner. So as you beat them up, as you fish, as they're getting dragged along the bottom and through brush and through grass, they'll tend to get these little like micro abrasions on the cheaper fluoros because they're not as hard as the higher end fluoros. And they'll start to discolor a little bit, right? They get a little bit opaque, so they're not as clear in the water as they were when they were brand new. Once you jump up to the core of fluorocarbons, that stuff goes away. Like it is clear and it stays clear. They're amazing lines. And VizX is one of those lines that is just phenomenal for standing up, taking a beating. It's a very thin line. It just is an excellent all-around fluorocarbon for just about anything that you want to do. Next up from Sunline, we have this stuff right here, Super FC Sniper. For years, maybe even decades, this was the only fluorocarbon that I used. It is incredible line. I mean, for the guy that just wants to spool it up and forget it forever, from everything from throwing a dark sleeper for a Great Lakes smallmouth to rolling a spinnerbait on the Tennessee River to drop shotting in a Highland reservoir, you can do everything on one line. That Super FC Sniper is incredible for the money. And again, huge cost savings compared to the truly high-end line options that are out there. Now, speaking of high-end, let's take a full jump up, okay? This is Seaguar Tatsu. In the world of high-end fluorocarbon, this is by far my favorite. It's a double structured line. The biggest difference that I see, because I don't want to get into tech and science, and there are these charts online that you can look at where every fluorocarbon is a little bit different than the next one. Don't worry about all that. Tatsu, here's what you need to know. It is an incredibly hard line, which means it takes an incredible beating before it gets cut. Most importantly, it stands up over time as a result of that too. So up front, you will pay quite a bit more to fill your spool with Tatsu than you will a different line. But the line will physically last longer on the spool. It's harder, more sensitive, crystal clear in the water. You have all these advantages along the way, and then it actually physically lasts longer as well. So huge advantages there if you can take that chunk on the front end and make the spend to get that more advanced line. 2 more for you. 3 more for you. I had one set in the wrong place. These are going to be the niche lines, if you will. And this is the stuff that I really enjoy. When I find niche line, I mean, I go down the rabbit hole, right? You guys know that. There are certain lines that just stand out for certain things. First one of the things that I personally do that's different than other people, I do a lot of my cranking on fluorocarbon, but I don't necessarily use just mainline fluorocarbon that I would use for other techniques. I really like this line right here, Sunline Crank FC. So this is going to be a niche line for cranking specifically. The advantages here, you get all the advantages of fluorocarbon, right? You get that crystal clear line. It's a hard line, super abrasion resistant. You can run it through the junk and it takes it, but it's designed to intentionally have higher stretch, more like a mono. So I get the advantages of a mono type line in fluorocarbon. So that is my favorite line to go out and throw a big crankbait on. Here's another one. I personally throw a swim bait on braid to leader 100% of the time, but a lot of people prefer to throw it on straight fluorocarbon. They're big baits. The best big bait line I've found so far, I've been playing with this fall, getting to know it, is that Sunline Big Bait FC, specifically designed for big bait fishing. Now, a lot of people would think that that's just a label, right? Like they slapped a label on it, targeted a market, and you call it a day. Any of these major line companies, if you take a deep dive into how they make lines, it's a mind-boggling what they can do. They can take a line and then lay a coating on it and make it way more durable around rock. Or they can make a little shift to it and it just handles wood unbelievably well. They can make another shift and it has incredible shock absorption, i.e. casting a big bait and backlashing and not wanting your bait to sail off into the sunset. They really do alter the characteristics of a line specific to what they want that line to do. So when they actually call out a very specific use case for a line, you're going to see things like really high knot strength, major durability, these things that are super important to that category, and it's actually a real thing. Last but not least is this stuff from Daiwa. This is the Samurai Hidden Concept Fluorocarbon. I just call it Daiwa Hidden. That's what you guys hear me calling it all the time in videos. This line, it's a fluorocarbon, but it's green, okay? It's not a clear line, thus the hidden portion of that. People think that clear line is a huge advantage because it's crystal clear in water. Sure, but what about when the water is off-colored, right? I use a lot of green line, a lot. The vast majority of my leader materials that I tie for jig fishing and big worms, all that, it's all green line. I love green line. I have a ton of confidence in it. But this line, many of you already know, some of you don't. This is the best line we've ever found for bait finesse. Now, of course, that would also carry over to spinning. If you want straight fluoro, what we found with bait finesse, that's where we discovered this line, is that I was spooling. We were just experimenting with lines. So like fill that reel with that one, that reel with that one, that reel with that one. We were using them throughout the seasons. And I just noticed as the months ticked by that this line, this Samurai Hidden, wasn't wearing out as often. It wasn't turning opaque, getting all coily, looking chafed up, needing to be replaced. It was tangibly lasting longer. and it fishes so incredibly well on bait finesse gear. It's a very supple line. It lays down beautifully on a bait caster. So a really, really hard fluorocarbon will want to backlash more than a supple fluorocarbon. So more advanced lines actually are better fit for a more advanced angler. They really are. But this line is incredibly supple. It lays down so smooth on our bait finesse reels. We can just send those casts and just not have any trouble out of them. It is such good line for finesse presentations. All right, with that, let's jump into, let's go mono, co-poly, and then we're going to do braid, because braid is the monster category here for me. All right, that wind just keeps getting nastier and nastier, so I had to reposition the boat. Let's dive into monofilament first. Very small category for me. I've got two lines that I use. This is Suffix Advanced, which is a more economical line. It's actually, as time has gone on, become my preferred line. This is Maxima Ultra Green. It is a higher end line and a line that I have used since I was a kid. Both excellent choices. You will notice that both are a tinted green line. They're not a truly clear line at all, but those are excellent lines. My entire life I used them as main line as I was growing up. These days I use them as a leader material. We'll get into that here in a minute. As far as copolymer goes, this is a category that I personally almost don't even use anymore, to be honest with you. I just see so many more advantages in either jumping mono to fluoro. But growing up, there was a time where I put a lot of time into P-Line CXX. And then at ICAST this year, I got my hands on some of this stuff. I walked out of there with the spool of it, the Suffix Defcon. And this has been an interesting line to play with. It's a clear copolymer. So a really clear line, but it gives you the advantages of both. Now, we keep those simple, right? Now we're gonna jump into braid, and this is a monster category for me. This is where I spend the vast majority of time. Probably 90% of my reels overall are spooled with braided line, and then depending on technique, they have one leader or another or no leader at all. But braided line gives huge advantages for both the beginner and the advanced angler. Let's start with the basic stuff, right? The more cost-effective stuff. I've got two lines for you. We've got standard Power Pro braided line, and then from Seaguar, we've got this Tact X. Tact X is awesome because it also comes with a spool of fluorocarbon leader material in there just as a bonus. But this is where we're looking at a more cost-effective braided line. So braided lines, lower stretch, you can hit a lot harder. There's just so many advantages to them. The biggest advantage that people don't realize is cost savings. And what I mean is even the most expensive braided lines, you pay a bunch of money up front to get it and to put it on your reel, but then it lasts. For the guys that fish really hard, it's gonna last at least a year. For the guy who just gets out there from time to time, it lasts for years without being respooled. And if you're careful with your size selection, you can use it for so many different things. What I mean is you can put a 30 or a 40 pound braid on, which sounds so heavy to a guy who's never experienced braid, but understand that braid is unbelievably thin, incredibly small diameter compared to all of the other lines. So a 30 or a 40 pound braid may sound huge, but it's so thin that it will tie beautifully to a 10, a 12, a 15, a 20 pound leader. So you can take that one reel and do all of these different things with it just by changing out that leader material. But the actual spool of braid will last for years. It's incredible how advanced this stuff is. Now, again, if you're on a budget, the standard Power Pro is excellent. Power Pro 10 pound is what I spooled all of my spinning reels with for many, many years. I just used the same line on all of them, and then I would just adjust my leaders from there. I've gotten more advanced in recent years, but I mean, it worked like a dream for a very long time. There's nothing wrong with that today. And then this Tact X, this is a very abrasive line. What I mean by that is it's rough to the touch. So it's only a few strands braided together. So think of it as a saw, if you will. So it is a budget-friendly line. It's an excellent choice for filling up your spools, especially if you're going to be fishing, you know, frog fishing, flipping, things where you're going to be in and around cover, because an abrasive line like this, it's like a saw. When you set the hook in lily pads, it will slice and cut its way through. It'll cut grass. It will drag fish out of cheese better than a smooth line will, because it quite literally cuts its way through things. It's a really, really good option. Now on to the core lines, if you will, those main lines. And of course, we're gonna get to leader here in a moment for all of this as well. But my core lines, notice all of a sudden we went from, you know, little filler spools to these giant bulk spools. 1,500 yard spool here, 3,500 yard spool here. Why do you think I own those? Because these are what I spool over and over and over and over on multiple reels, right? This is what I'm filling my boat up with day in and day out. So I have two lines here. My main braided line today that I use for my bait casters for all my power fishing is Suffix 832. It is an incredible line. It is not the thinnest line in the world, but it is a very cost-effective line. It is a very consistent line. It's incredibly durable. It stands up great. For the money, it just basically can't be beat. It is incredible stuff. And that is quite literally why I bought a 3,500 yard spool of 65-pound braid. I spool off this thing constantly because that is the core of my fishing. Now, the other main braid that I use for my bait casters is Power Pro Max Quattro. Max Quattro is thinner than standard Power Pro. So why would I be using Max Quattro for certain techniques? I tend to use Max Quattro for some of the finessier techniques, but the biggest place that I use it is all of my frog rods. Now, why? I'm sure you've noticed a trend of downsized bait casters. If you were a bass fisherman 20 years ago, basically every bait caster was a 200 size spool. Now there are a lot of 150s and 70s and occasionally even smaller than that. Well, that is literally less line capacity. Most of the time it doesn't matter, but when you use higher end reels, I use the Shimano Metanium MGL a lot. That's what I use to throw a frog. It's a high end reel. It casts so far, it's out of this world. If I spool it with 65-pound Suffix 832, I will literally cast the entire spool off with a frog and hit the knot at the bottom of the spool. I can throw it all out there. Max Quattro is like a full size thinner than its actual strength. So it is a thinner line at each line size. So when I use 65-pound Max Quattro on that same Metanium MGL, I cast as hard as I can with a frog, and I don't hit the bottom of the spool. I get close, but I never get to the bottom, which means I am getting every inch of distance out of that thing that I could possibly want to get, which means I'm covering as much water as physically possible, being as efficient as possible on the water. And that is so important to me. See, there are these little things that make all the difference in your fishing if you pay attention to them. That is a difference in about 8 to 10 yards of casting distance on every single cast. So if I go to Gunnersville with 4 frog rods on deck, it's the difference between reaching out and touching everything and coming up short all day long. It's a huge difference maker. Now, let's talk about some high-end braids, okay? Suffix 832 is incredible. They have another line called 131. 131 is noticeably smoother than 832. It lays like a dream on a spool. Just no memory, no life. It's so limp on the spool. It casts so unbelievably well. It ties connection knots unbelievably well. It is just a high-end, keeping this simple, a high-end version of an 832. Just an incredible line for the money. Lasts an unbelievably long time. I love this stuff. The only downside is I can't buy it in bulk. You have to buy it in filler spools. Two more for you. These to me are finesse lines, okay? We've got from Sunline, we have All Might. All Might comes in a couple of colors. One that is this rolling like orange and green mix, and then one that's bright pink. Now the advantage of All Might is that this is a sinking braid. The vast majority of braided lines float. They stay high in the water column. But All Might wants to sink like a fluorocarbon does. What's the advantage? Well, the advantage is anytime you're fishing deep. Wintertime fishing, dragging a jig out deep. If you're using it to do a variety of things, to jig and minnow, strolling, anything where you're trying to be connected to your bait, but your bait is in deep water, it will blow your mind if you do a side-by-side comparison, how much faster a bait will get down on a sinking braid versus a floating braid, and then how much more connected you are to the bait, especially if you are in a place that has current, like the Tennessee River, or a lake almost anywhere in the country if they're pulling water. The difference, you never think about it, but when you throw your line out there and your main line floats, your bait sinks and then it has to drag all that line down. But when you go to a sinking braid, you throw it out there and it sinks and you are a straight connection to your bait at all times. There's none of this drag, none of this arc in the water. So you are more connected, you sink faster because it's not pulling all that line down. And then when you go to set the hook, there's none of that arc in the line. So you are much more direct to your bait. Sinking braid has huge advantages, especially the #1 place is definitely strolling, because that's a technique where the bites can be so light. But drop shot, Ned rig, micro jigs, any finesse technique, there's major advantage there unless you need a floating line. Now, last but not least, a very high-end line, a niche line from Seaguar. This is called PEX8. This has, over the last year, taken over my spinning reels. This is on the vast majority of my spinning reels now. The reason why, it's a high-vis line. It's like a pink and green. This line is so thin for its size, it's almost scary. What I mean by that is that the line itself is as much as like 22% thinner than all the other braids at any one size. So like this 10-pound braid compared to every other 10-pound braid, this is that much thinner. Okay, now this is something, I can't believe we got this far into this video before we even got to where this matters, but it's because we haven't gotten the leader materials yet. The fishing industry, the line industry within fishing is all over the place. There are no standards for rating a fishing line. And what I mean by that is you can call anything 10 pound. There's no regulatory commission that's gonna come tell you you're a crook, right? So you can take a 10 pound that really is 10 pound and call it 10 pound. The next guy can take a line that's really 18 pound and just say it's 10 pound. And the guy who doesn't pay attention will go, wow, that one's way stronger. I like this 10 pound. Well, it's because his 10 pound is almost twice as thick, right? They never even pay attention. And this has been going on forever, as long as we've been fishing. these games happen where they can just label it whatever they want, and it gets into the consumer's mind that, wow, this line is so strong. What you need to start doing in your fishing is start not only reading the size, so 21 pound, okay, but reading the diameters. They give it to you in fractions of an inch as well as in millimeters, and you can compare that across all brands. This is why this is so important. So the Seaguar PEX8 is so insanely thin that there's incredible advantage to having a thin line, but I actually don't need a thinner line. So what I have been able to do, and the reason I love this stuff so much, is I told you the vast majority of the time I use 10-pound braid. That's what I've typically used through the years. There's exceptions, but if we're just drawing a line in the sand, that's what I used. Now I'm using this stuff because it really is breaking where they say it's breaking. And I'm using the 18 and the 21 the vast majority of the time on my spinning reels, but it's just as thin as what I've always been using. So my line is almost twice as strong as ever before, and I've given up nothing. It's the same size on the spool. It's incredible. Now, you want to size up. You don't want to go to some insanely thin line for a technique you're used to because your knots won't tie the same. It's not as thick. You might nick it and you're not used to that because it is so paper thin. So that's why I just size up. I've got a size I'm used to, right? A diameter I'm used to. I just match the diameter and now I have a way stronger line. Now with that, we're going to jump in to leader materials because these tie straight into that braided line. If you are going to fish braided line, you have to be efficient at understanding the differences in leader materials and knowing how to tie those connections. And today we're not going to dive into how to make all the connection knots and all that. We've done that in other videos. In fact, if there's room, I'll link that right at the top of the video description for you so you can see some of the key knots that Tim and I tie. But what I like to do is, you know, frog fishing and flipping, that's straight braid, right to the bait. Everything else is going to get a leader of some kind, okay? If I'm power fishing, so jigs, big worms, things like that, I'll almost always just use a mono leader on the end of that thing. I see no disadvantage, and in fact, I see huge gain. So most people use fluoro leader, and I do too, for a lot of things. But for those just main core power techniques, you can save a fortune by tying mono leaders instead of fluorocarbon, and you gain the stretch, the shock absorption, and you gain it without a huge spend, okay? So we can get that in fluorocarbon, but we have to spend a lot, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But just day in and day out, I mean, a spool of Suffix Advance is very inexpensive. And I can tie leaders off of this for a couple of years before I feel like I need to buy a new one. And it's not that I ever even get through it all. It's just that I like to have new line in the boat. After it's rolling around in the boat for a while, I want a new spool. So huge advantage there. Now, my main fluorocarbon leaders. You're going to see me switching to fluorocarbon for all of my spinning applications. That's typically going to be fluoro leaders. And then any time that I get into crystal clear water. So like even if I'm jig fishing, if it's winter time, fish are lethargic and I'm like slow dragging a football and the water's really, really clear where the fish might spend a lot of time looking at it, I switch to fluorocarbon. But if it's summertime and the water's kind of green, I don't even think twice about it. Mono all the way. For my fluorocarbons, I have two. For the last couple of years, I've been using Gold Label day in and day out, and it has changed everything for me. Okay, Gold Label, just like we just talked about that PEX8, Gold Label is incredibly thin. So if you're used to using 6-pound leader for a drop shot, you go to a 6-pound Gold Label, it's way thinner than what you're used to. So it's even more invisible. So you can go that option, but you also have the option to just size it up. So the vast majority of my finesse fishing, I am now doing on 8, 10, or even 12-pound Gold Label because it's so much thinner than the alternatives, okay? What I found is that in doing that, my break-offs are like, they're gone, right? The line is so much stronger for the size, for the diameter. It's amazing. My confidence has skyrocketed when I stick fish on a finesse setup that I'm going to get those fish. Just huge advantage there. And then this year I started, so I went here and you pay for it, right? And I built all this confidence, and then I'm like, well, I keep seeing that Grand Max. All right, I'm gonna bite, I'm gonna try it. The Grand Max takes it even another step. Like the line is even harder. It lasts longer. It's mind-blowing how thin this stuff is. It's even a tiny bit thinner than the Gold Label is. I mean, confidence off the charts, like big smallmouth, big spotted bass, clear water fishing. I just have no question that I'm going to get those fish. I am more confident in my line selections today than I have been in my entire fishing life. It makes that big of a difference. Now, you pay more for Grand Max than you do for Gold Label, and of course all of that is going to cost more than just a cheap mono alternative, but it just depends how deep into this rabbit hole you want to go. I'm telling you exactly what I'm using. Then last but not least, let's talk swim baits, okay? I already talked about that big bait line, but for a swim bait, I use all braid to leader. The only reason that anyone ever has a problem is they don't understand braid. They go too small. So they're like, oh, I'm gonna throw a swim bait, I'll use 30-pound braid. That's strong. No, it's not about strength. It's about shock absorption. First backlash, tink, it's gone, right? And those are the horror stories you see online. And it's always just an issue of education. The guy didn't realize that braid is so thin that he needed to size it way up. So all of my swim baiting is on 65 to 80-pound braid, and that just eliminates all of that. And while that is complete overkill for a bass, you just guarantee that you won't backlash and ever lose a bait. And it's so thin, it's no different than having 20 or 25-pound mono or fluoro on your spool. It behaves the same. Then from there, what I do is I tie a leader to get that strength and that invisibility at the bait end of the line. For years, I did all my big bait fishing with mono leader. And I want you to understand, I have big baited for multiple years on straight mono, multiple years on straight fluoro, decades on braid. I have put actual years into all of them. I didn't just come up with these theories. It was time on the water. And I'm so confident in 65 to 80-pound braid tied to a fluorocarbon leader. And I'm gonna use one of three. So that Gold Label, again, if the fish are super leery, like if I was in a tournament situation, I just knew that I knew I had to get bit, the Gold Label is my thinnest option. So that stuff, I mean, a 25 or a 30-pound Gold Label, I get in these conversations all the time, okay? So people online are like, no, straight 20-pound fluoro, that's the only way for the glide bait. And I'm like, 65-pound braid to a 35-pound leader, we'll catch the same fish. Those people think I'm out of my mind. What they never stop to realize is that I'm using a high-end line, and my 30-pound fluoro is thinner than their 20-pound mono. My line is smaller than theirs, but they just hear the number. They hear 30-pound, 35-pound, they just glaze over. They can't handle it, but that's not what it's about. Diameter to diameter, I'm throwing a thinner but far more superior line. So if it's like down to it and you just have to get that bite, you need the thinnest line to up your odds. That Gold Label is incredible, all the way up in the large sizes too. Day in and day out, I swim bait on these two lines right here. If I'm wake baiting, so floating lures, then I'm going to use actually I brought the wrong one. This is the fluorocarbon. What I need is the mono. I'll link the correct one in the video description for you. But the mono is an incredible shock absorbing nylon line, but it floats. And that's what I use for the vast majority of my wake bait fishing. But then day in and day out, all of my glide baiting, all of my big soft baits, right? From throwing a mag draft to a Huddleston to a Savage gear to throwing all my glides, it's going to be Braid, typically 65 to 80 pounds Suffix 832. That's the main line I use. I can spool up big spools of it. It doesn't break the bank, super reliable. And then I tie this on this Sunline Tunegit, at least that's how I've always said it, Tunegit shock leader. Now, you pay for that line, right? It's a high-end line. But what I've found is that its shock absorption is incredible. So, casting, and we're not just talking about me, I've guided for many, many years. I would give multi-$100 baits to people that had never thrown a swim bait in their life, and then I'm just letting them huck them out into the lake. But because I'm confident in heavy braid to that leader material, they backlash all day long. No client ever slung one of my high-end baits. For years, they never cast one off. Never happened. And believe me, the backlashes would blow your mind, but the gear can take it. And because I'm going to that high-end line, it is much thinner diameter, so the argument is out the window on 30 to 35 pound being too heavy. It's not too heavy. I can catch giant largemouth on that all the time, even in crystal clear water situations. And in most situations, I'm still throwing equal or thinner line to what the average guy is throwing. I'm just throwing a far superior, stronger line that can handle the fish, but it can also handle all the abuse from either fish or horrible casting, because those are realities for all of us, right? All right, guys, we could just keep this thing rolling forever, but in the video description, I'll link all of these lines in the order that I talked about. And remember, there are great beginner options in every category. There are incredible high-end options. That PEX8 on spinning is incredible. It has altered my fishing. Suffix 832. Just day in and day out power braid, right? Just gets the job done. Samurai for BFS. Tatsu, high-end fluorocarbon, is just untouchable. But the guy who doesn't want to spend a fortune, FC Sniper, remarkable. And then you get down to those budget options, right? You get Model FC or Seaguar 101, and those things on a budget will just take your fishing to the next level compared to fishing with cheap Walmart mono, right? You can take it as far as you want, but it makes a giant difference in your day-to-day fishing and in your total outcome. You get more bites, you fish with more confidence, you land more of the fish, you lose less of your baits along the way. And then again, higher end lines, while they cost more up front, last much longer on your spools. So there is a huge cost offset in the end that you need to consider. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.